Kira had never imagined her life would end in the slave markets of Zirian Prime. The metal collar around her neck felt heavier with each passing day, a constant reminder that she was nothing more than property in this alien world. The Draconian Empire had conquered Earth 3 years ago, and humans like her were now commodities traded between the powerful reptilian nobles who ruled the galaxy. The slave market buzzed with activity as potential buyers examined their merchandise. Kira kept her eyes down, knowing that meeting a Draconian's gaze could result in punishment. She had learned to make herself invisible, to blend into the background, and hope that whoever purchased her would at least be merciful. When the announcement came that Emperor Vorthak himself would be visiting the market, every slave fell silent. The ancient Dragon Emperor was legendary throughout the galaxy, a being so old and powerful that entire star systems bowed before him. No one had expected him to personally select slaves for his palace. Kira's heart pounded as the massive doors to the market opened. Emperor Vorthak entered with a presence that filled the entire space. His scales were deep emerald with hints of gold, and his eyes held the wisdom and weariness of someone who had lived for millennia. Unlike the younger Draconians, who often displayed their power through aggression, the Emperor moved with quiet confidence. The slave traders immediately began presenting their finest specimens, young and attractive beings from various conquered worlds. Kira watched from her corner as beautiful Zentaurian dancers and strong Corvan warriors were paraded before the Emperor. She assumed he would select the obvious choices and leave. Instead, Vorthak's ancient eyes scanned the entire market methodically. When his gaze fell upon Kira, she felt as though he could see directly into her soul. She tried to look away, but something in his expression held her attention. There was no cruelty there, no hunger for domination. Instead, she saw something unexpected: loneliness. The Emperor approached her corner slowly, his massive form casting a shadow over the smaller slaves huddled nearby. He said, his voice deep and resonant. "What is your name?" Kira's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Kira, your Imperial Majesty." "And what did you do before the conquest?" The question surprised her. Most Draconians never bothered to learn about their slaves' previous lives. "I was a teacher, Your Majesty. I taught children in a small town." Vorthak nodded slowly, as if this information pleased him somehow. A teacher, someone who shaped young minds and gave them hope for the future. Before Kira could respond, the Emperor turned to the slave trader. "I will take this one." The trader's jaw dropped. "Your Majesty, surely you would prefer one of our premium selections? This human is unremarkable, and, frankly, she's past her prime years." The Emperor's eyes flashed with dangerous light. "Are you questioning my judgment?" The trader immediately bowed low. "Of course not, Your Majesty. The human is yours." As the transaction was completed, Kira felt a mixture of terror and confusion. Why had the most powerful being in the galaxy chosen her over obviously superior options? What did he want with a former teacher who had nothing special to offer? The journey to the Imperial Palace took 3 days aboard the Emperor's personal ship. Kira was given quarters far more luxurious than anything she had experienced since the conquest, with actual windows that showed the stars streaming by. She was also surprised to discover that she was the only new acquisition from the slave market. On the second day, an elderly Draconian servant named Zephyr brought her a meal and stayed to talk. "The Emperor has requested that you dine with him tonight," Zephyr announced, his tone careful and neutral. Kira's blood ran cold. She had heard stories about what happened when powerful Draconians took a personal interest in their slaves. "Is there anything specific I should know? Any way I should behave?" Zephyr studied her for a long moment. "Just be yourself. The Emperor values honesty above all else." That evening, Kira was led to a private dining chamber that was surprisingly modest given the Emperor's status. Vorthak was already seated, but he rose when she entered, a courtesy that shocked her. In her experience, Draconians never showed such respect to humans. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I hope you find the food acceptable." I had the kitchen prepare some dishes from your homeworld. The meal was indeed Earth food, but prepared with ingredients she didn't recognize. As they ate, Vorthak asked her questions about her life before the conquest. He wanted to know about her students, her teaching methods, her hopes, and dreams that had been cut short. "Why do you care?" Kira finally asked, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "I'm just a slave, a piece of property you bought on a whim." Vorthak set down his utensils and looked at her directly. "Do you know how old I am, Kira?" She shook her head. "I have lived for over 3,000 years. I have ruled this empire for 2 millennia. In all that time, I have been surrounded by those who want something from me. Power, wealth, favor, protection. They tell me what they think I want to hear, and they fear me more than they respect me." He paused, his ancient eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "When I saw you in that market, I saw something I hadn't encountered in centuries. Genuine honesty. You looked at me not with calculation or fear, but with simple human recognition. For a moment, I felt like a person rather than an institution." Kira was stunned by his vulnerability. This was not the conversation she had expected to have with the most feared ruler in the galaxy. "I still don't understand why you bought me." Vorthak smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from any Draconian since the conquest. "Because I'm tired of being alone, and I think you understand what that feels like." Over the following weeks, their dinner conversations became a regular occurrence. Kira learned that despite his fearsome reputation, Vorthak was deeply thoughtful and surprisingly well-read about human culture. He spoke multiple human languages fluently and had studied Earth's history, literature, and philosophy. She also discovered that he was not the tyrant she had expected. While the Draconian Empire was undeniably built on conquest and subjugation, Vorthak governed with a surprisingly light hand. He delegated most day-to-day operations to his ministers and seemed more interested in maintaining stability than expanding his power. "Why did you conquer Earth?" she asked one evening. Vorthak was quiet for a long moment. "Because my generals demanded it, and because I was too tired to argue. I have conquered 100 worlds, Kira. Each one was supposed to bring glory and prosperity to the Empire. Instead, they brought only more responsibility and more loneliness. Then, why don't you stop? You're the Emperor. Your word is law. Power is more complicated than that. If I show weakness, there are dozens of ambitious nobles who would challenge my rule. The Empire would fragment in a civil war, and billions would die. Sometimes maintaining a terrible peace is better than risking a catastrophic war." As the weeks turned into months, Kira began to understand the impossible position Vorthak found himself in. He was trapped by his own power, unable to show mercy without appearing weak, unable to pursue peace without inviting aggression from his own subjects. She also began to see him not as a monster, but as a deeply lonely being who had been worn down by centuries of isolation. His conversations with her were clearly the highlight of his days, the only time he could drop his imperial facade and speak freely. The change in their relationship became obvious to the palace staff, though Kira was unsure exactly what that relationship was. She was no longer treated as a slave, but she wasn't exactly free either. She had run of the palace, access to the library, and servants who treated her with respect rather than contempt. It was Zephyr who finally explained the situation to her. "The Emperor is going to make you an offer," he said one afternoon as he served her tea in the palace gardens. "I thought you should be prepared." "What kind of offer?" "Marriage." Kira nearly dropped her cup. "That's impossible. I'm human. I'm a former slave. The nobility would never accept it. The Emperor stopped caring about the nobility's opinions a long time ago. He's going to offer you a choice. Become his empress and help him try to reform the empire, or accept your freedom and return to Earth with enough resources to live comfortably for the rest of your life. And if I choose freedom, then you'll never see him again, and he'll return to his isolation. He won't make the same mistake twice." That night, Vorthak made his proposal over dinner, just as Zephyr had predicted. He laid out both options clearly, emphasizing that she would face no punishment for choosing freedom. "I won't lie to you about what marriage to me would mean," he said. "You would face hatred from the nobility, assassination attempts from my enemies, and the constant pressure of imperial politics. But you would also have the power to make real changes to improve the lives of humans and other conquered peoples throughout the empire." Kira stared at her hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the choice before her. "Can I have time to think about it?" "Of course. Take as long as you need." That night, Kira wandered the palace gardens under the alien stars, trying to process everything that had happened. 6 months ago, she had been a broken slave with no hope for the future. Now she was being offered the chance to become the most powerful woman in the galaxy, married to a being who had shown her more kindness and respect than she had thought possible. But it wasn't just about her anymore. If she accepted, she could potentially help millions of humans and other conquered peoples. If she refused, she would be free, but Vorthak would remain isolated and the Empire would continue unchanged. As dawn broke over the palace, Kira realized that her choice had been made the moment she understood the depth of Vorthak's loneliness and the possibility for change his proposal represented. She would accept, not just for herself, but for everyone who suffered under the Empire's rule. The next morning, she found Vorthak in his private study, surrounded by reports from across the galaxy. When she entered, he looked up with barely concealed hope in his ancient eyes. "I have an answer," she said simply, "but I have conditions." For the first time since she had known him, Vorthak actually laughed. "I should have expected that from a teacher." "Very well, what are your conditions?" "First, any children we have will be raised to understand both human and draconian cultures equally. Second, I want to establish schools throughout the Empire that teach the histories and cultures of all conquered peoples, not just draconian propaganda. And third, I want a gradual program to grant more autonomy to conquered worlds, starting with Earth." Vorthak considered her demands carefully. "The first two I can agree to immediately. The third will take time and careful maneuvering, but yes, I think it can be done." "Then, yes, Your Imperial Majesty, I will marry you." As Vorthak rose and took her hands in his massive clawed ones, Kira felt the weight of destiny settling around them both. She had no idea what the future would hold, but for the first time since the conquest, she felt hope. The announcement of the Emperor's engagement to a human slave sent shockwaves throughout the Draconian Empire. News of the impending marriage spread like wildfire across the galaxy, reaching every corner of Vorthak's vast domain within days. The reactions were as varied as they were intense. On the conquered human worlds, the news brought a mixture of hope and disbelief. In the ruins of New York, former rebels gathered in secret to discuss what this might mean for their people. Some saw it as a betrayal, their former teacher now sleeping with the enemy. Others viewed it as the first real chance for change they had seen since the conquest. Among the Draconian nobility, the reaction was far more uniformly negative. Duke Malthius of the Crimson Fleet was the first to voice what many were thinking when he arrived at the palace, demanding an immediate audience with the Emperor. "This is madness, Your Imperial Majesty," Malthius declared, his red scales bristling with indignation. "A human? A former slave? The bloodline of our empire stretches back 10,000 years, and you would contaminate it with this inferior species." Vorthak received the Duke in his throne room, with Kira seated in a place of honor beside him. Her presence, there was a deliberate statement, one that was not lost on Malthius or the other nobles who had gathered to witness the confrontation. "I fail to see how the woman I choose to marry is any concern of yours, Duke," Vorthak replied, his voice carrying the dangerous undertone that had preceded the destruction of rebellious worlds. "Are you questioning my judgment in matters of state?" Malthius pressed on, despite the warning in the Emperor's voice. "I'm questioning a decision that threatens the very foundation of our empire. The nobility will never accept a human empress. There will be rebellions, assassination attempts, civil war. Then I suggest you ensure your fellow nobles understand that such actions would be met with the full force of my displeasure, Vorthak said coldly. I have ruled this empire for 2 millennia without their permission, and I will continue to do so. After Malthius left, visibly shaken but not deterred, Kira turned to Vorthak with concern in her eyes. He's right about one thing. There will be attempts on my life. I know, Vorthak replied. That's why we're accelerating the wedding ceremony. Once you're officially my empress, killing you becomes an act of treason against the imperial house itself, not just an assault on a human. The wedding preparations became a delicate balance between draconian tradition and Vorthak's desire to honor Kira's human heritage. The ceremony would take place in the great temple of Zirian Prime, but Kira insisted on including elements from human marriage customs as well. As news of the wedding spread, responses poured in from across the empire. The reaction from Earth was particularly complex. President Chun, the puppet leader installed by the Draconians, issued a carefully worded statement congratulating the union between our peoples. But intercepted rebel communications told a different story. She's forgotten who she is, transmitted resistance leader Sarah Martinez from her hidden base in the Australian outback. Kira Thompson was a good woman, a good teacher. But power corrupts, even when it comes wrapped in scales and pretty promises. Other rebel leaders disagreed. Colonel James Harrison, operating from the ruins of London, saw opportunity where others saw betrayal. If she's genuinely trying to help our people, we should support her. God knows we need allies in high places. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, Kira was learning just how complicated her new role would be. Lady Vera, the chief of Imperial Protocol, was doing her best to prepare a human for ceremonies that had been designed for Draconians. The ritual scarring is absolutely essential, Lady Vera explained, showing Kira images of the traditional markings that Draconian brides received. Without it, the marriage won't be recognized by the old noble families. Understand the importance of tradition, Kira replied carefully, but perhaps we could modify the ritual to something more appropriate for human physiology, something that honors both cultures. Lady Vera's scales darkened with disapproval. Your Imperial Majesty to be, with respect, these traditions have been observed for thousands of years. And now they're being modified for the first time, Vorthak interjected, entering the room. Lady Vera, work with my bride to create something that respects our traditions while acknowledging her heritage. This wedding will set precedents that may last for centuries. As the wedding date approached, the challenges multiplied. Intelligence reports indicated that at least 3 separate assassination plots were in development, ranging from poison at the wedding feast to a planned bombing of the temple itself. Vorthak's security chief, a massive Draconian named Commander Thorn, was working around the clock to identify and neutralize the threats. I've tripled security for this ceremony, Thorn reported during a private briefing. But I cannot guarantee complete safety. There are too many variables, too many potential access points. Perhaps we should postpone, Kira suggested, but Vorthak shook his head. Postponing would be seen as weakness. We proceed as planned. 3 days before the wedding, the first assassination attempt occurred. Kira was walking in the palace gardens when a maintenance worker approached her, ostensibly to trim nearby bushes. Instead, he pulled a plasma knife and lunged at her. The attack was stopped by Zephyr, who had been discreetly following at a distance. The elderly Draconian moved with surprising speed, tackling the assassin before the blade could reach Kira. In a struggle that followed, Zephyr was severely injured, taking a wound to his side that would have killed Kira instantly. As medical teams rushed Zephyr to the palace infirmary, Kira knelt beside him, holding his clawed hand. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk yourself for me?" Zephyr's voice was weak but clear. "Because I've served this palace for 40 years, and I've never seen the Emperor happy until you arrived. That's worth protecting." The assassination attempt sent shockwaves through the palace, but it also had an unexpected effect. Many of the palace staff, who had been uncertain about their human future empress, rallied to her support. They had seen her genuine concern for Zephyr, her lack of imperial arrogance, and her respectful treatment of everyone regardless of their station. Word of the attack also reached Earth, where it prompted heated debates in both human resistance cells and draconian administrative centers. Some humans saw the attempt as proof that Kira was genuinely threatening the established order. Others viewed it as evidence that she was in over her head and would only bring more suffering to their people. Among the draconian nobility, reactions were mixed. While few openly celebrated the attempt, many made it clear that they wouldn't mourn if the next one succeeded. Duke Malthius was particularly vocal in his concerns about security at the palace. Perhaps, he suggested during a meeting of the Noble Council, His Imperial Majesty should reconsider this marriage for his own safety as much as hers. The discord it's causing threatens the stability of the Empire. General Corax, the Emperor's military chief, disagreed. The Empire's stability comes from the Emperor's strength, not from appeasing disloyal nobles. Those plotting against our future Empress are plotting against the crown itself. 2 days before the wedding, Vorthak made a surprising announcement. Rather than the traditional private ceremony attended only by nobles, the wedding would be broadcast live throughout the Empire. Every human world would see their former teacher become an empress, and every draconian world would witness their emperor's commitment to change. "Are you sure about this?" Kira asked as they reviewed the final arrangements. "This will make everything more public, more political. Everything we do from now on will be political," Vorthak replied. "At least this way, we control the narrative. People will see who you really are, not the caricature our enemies try to paint." The night before the wedding, Kira couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony of her chambers, looking out over the imperial capital and thinking about how drastically her life had changed. A year ago, she had been teaching 8-year-olds about Earth's history. Tomorrow, she would become the most powerful woman in the galaxy. Having second thoughts, Vorthak's voice came from behind her. He had entered so quietly she hadn't heard him. "Third and fourth thoughts," she admitted. "I keep wondering if I'm the right person for this. If I'm strong enough, smart enough, brave enough." Vorthak joined her on the balcony, his massive form casting a protective shadow. "Do you know what I was doing the night before my coronation 2,000 years ago?" Kira shook her head. "I was hiding in my chambers, convinced that I was about to destroy everything my father had built. I was young, inexperienced, and terrified. But my advisor told me something I've never forgotten. The fact that you're afraid of the responsibility means you understand its weight. That understanding will make you a better ruler than someone who feels entitled to power." "And did you? Destroy everything, I mean?" Vorthak smiled. "I made mistakes. Many of them. But I also learned, adapted, and grew into the role. You will too." As they stood together under the alien stars, Kira felt some of her anxiety ease. She wasn't just marrying Vorthak for political reasons, or even for love, though she had grown to care for him deeply. She was accepting a responsibility to try to make the galaxy a better place for everyone living under draconian rule. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. As Kira was prepared for the ceremony by a team of attendants, she could hear the crowds gathering outside the temple. The guest list included representatives from every world in the Empire, rebel leaders who had been granted safe passage, and nobles who opposed the marriage but couldn't risk offending the Emperor by staying away. The ceremony itself was a blend of traditions that had never been combined before. Kira wore a gown that incorporated both human white lace and draconian ceremonial scales, a visual representation of a union between their peoples. The rituals combined ancient draconian vows with human marriage customs that Vorthak had researched specifically for her. When they exchanged vows, speaking in both languages so that every viewer across the Empire could understand, Kira felt the weight of history settling around them. This wasn't just a wedding. It was the beginning of a new era. The most dramatic moment came when, according to tradition, Vorthak was required to demonstrate his ability to protect his mate. Instead of the ritual combat usually staged for royal weddings, he made an unprecedented announcement. Today marks not just the union of two people, but the beginning of a new relationship between our empire and the worlds we govern. As my first act as a married emperor, I am establishing the Imperial Council of Worlds, which will include representatives from all conquered planets in the governance of their own affairs. The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled guests. This was far more than the symbolic gestures many had expected. It was a fundamental restructuring of how the empire operated. After the ceremony, as they stood together on the palace balcony, acknowledging the cheers of the crowd below, Kira realized that the real work was just beginning. The wedding had been a public statement of intent. Now they had to prove that their partnership could actually deliver on its promises. Any regrets? Vorthak asked as they waved to their subjects. Ask me in 100 years, Kira replied, then paused. Can humans live that long here? Vorthak's smile was mysterious. We'll find out together. That night, as the celebration continued throughout the capital, Kira and Vorthak sat in their private chambers planning their next moves. They had won the first battle by successfully completing the wedding, but the war for the future of the empire was just beginning. The intelligence reports on Thorn's death showed that while the wedding had inspired hope on many human worlds, it had also galvanized the opposition. Conservative draconian nobles were already meeting in secret, and there were signs that some might be willing to risk open rebellion rather than accept a human empress. They'll test us soon, Vorthak warned, probably within the next few months. They need to see if we're serious about reform or just making empty promises. Then, we better make sure our first moves are strong ones, Kira replied, already thinking about which policies they should prioritize, starting with education and cultural preservation on the human worlds. As they planned their strategy for transforming an empire, neither of them noticed the shadow that moved past their window or the small recording device that captured their conversation before disappearing into the night. The opposition was already gathering intelligence, preparing for the confrontation that would determine whether their marriage was the beginning of a new golden age or the spark that would ignite a galactic civil war. 6 months after the wedding that shocked the galaxy, Empress Kira stood before the Imperial Council of Worlds for the first time as its human co-chair. The chamber had been redesigned to accommodate representatives from dozens of different species, each bringing their own cultural perspectives and grievances to the table. The transformation had not been easy. The first major test of their new order came when the mining colonies of Kepler-7 went on strike, demanding the same representation that Earth had been promised. The response would set the precedent for how the Empire handled dissent under the new system. Duke Malthius, who had been appointed to the council as a gesture of inclusion, immediately called for military intervention. These miners are contracted workers, your Imperial Majesties. Their obligations are clear, and their rebellion threatens Imperial supply lines. Kira studied the reports from Kepler-7, which painted a different picture. The miners were working in dangerous conditions with obsolete safety equipment, and their previous requests for basic improvements have been ignored for years. They're not rebelling, she said calmly. They're negotiating. There's a difference. Negotiating implies equal standing, snapped Count Drexel, another conservative noble. These beings are subjects of the Empire, not partners. Actually, Kira replied, pulling up the holographic display that showed the new Imperial Charter they had spent months drafting under the Reform Constitution. They're partners. Article 7 clearly states that all Imperial subjects have the right to petition for improved working conditions and fair treatment. The debate that followed was intense, with conservative nobles arguing that giving in to the miners would set a dangerous precedent. Progressive members countered that addressing legitimate grievances would prevent larger uprisings. The session stretched for hours, testing the new democratic processes they had implemented. Finally, Vorthak spoke. The miners of Kepler-7 will receive new safety equipment and a 20% improvement in working conditions. In return, they will return to work and establish a formal representative body to handle future concerns. This is not negotiable. The decision was controversial, but it worked. Within a week, the mines were operating at full capacity again, and similar representative bodies were forming on industrial worlds throughout the empire. More importantly, it demonstrated that the new system could handle challenges without resorting to the brutal suppression that had characterized previous imperial responses. However, not everyone was pleased with these developments. Intelligence reports began indicating that several noble houses were meeting in secret, discussing what they termed the human problem. Surveillance footage showed Duke Malthius entertaining visitors at his estate on Draconis Major, including some faces that Commander Thorne recognized as known rebels from the old regime. The first direct challenge to Kira's authority came during a session focused on cultural preservation rights. The representative from Centauri Beta, a world inhabited by the Artistic Alliance, was presenting a proposal to rebuild their destroyed museums when Duke Malthius stood up. "I object to this entire proceeding," he declared, his voice carrying throughout the chamber. "We are entertaining the demands of conquered peoples as if they were equal citizens. This human empress has forgotten that this is the Draconian Empire, not some democratic federation of equals." The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned to Kira, who remained seated calmly despite the direct insult. She had been preparing for this moment since the wedding, knowing that eventually someone would force a public confrontation. "Your objection is noted, Duke Malthius," she said evenly. "However, this council operates under the authority of Emperor Vorthak, who delegated these responsibilities to me. Are you questioning his judgment?" Malthius's scales flushed darker, a sign of anger among his species. "I'm questioning whether a former slave who has been married to our emperor for less than a year should be making decisions that affect billions of loyal Draconian citizens." "Careful, Duke." Vorthak's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He had been listening from his throne at the back of the chamber, but now he rose to his full, imposing height. "You're very close to treason." "I'm close to speaking truth," Malthius shot back, apparently deciding that he had gone too far to retreat. "This human has bewitched you somehow. The nobles whisper that you've grown soft, that the old emperor who conquered worlds has been replaced by someone who negotiates with rebels and elevates slaves." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Around the chamber, representatives from various worlds watched the confrontation with fascination and terror. The stability of the entire empire might depend on how this moment played out. Kira stood slowly, her human frame seeming impossibly small compared to the massive draconians surrounding her. But when she spoke, her voice carried with absolute authority. "Duke Malthius, you speak of conquest and dominance as if they were virtues. But I see the reports that cross my desk every day. I see the cost of ruling through fear alone." She activated the chamber's main display, showing statistics that made several nobles shift uncomfortably. "Rebellion incidents are down 60% since we began implementing reforms. Industrial productivity is up 40%. Tax collection has improved by 30% because people are willing to cooperate rather than resist." "These aren't the numbers of an empire growing weak, Duke. These are the numbers of an empire growing stronger." Malthius sneered. "Numbers can be manipulated. What cannot be hidden is that our military forces are being restrained from properly dealing with dissent. Our nobles are being forced to treat former slaves as equals. Our traditions are being abandoned in favor of alien customs." "Our traditions," Kira replied, "included ritual executions of entire populations for minor infractions. They included slavery, forced labor, and the complete destruction of conquered cultures. If those are the traditions you're mourning, then I'm proud to be abandoning them." The Duke's composure finally cracked. "You dare lecture me about draconian traditions? You, who were selling yourself in a slave market 6 months ago. You forget your place, human." The insult was so direct, so calculated to provoke a reaction, that the chamber held its collective breath. But instead of anger, Kira smiled. "You're absolutely right, Duke. I do forget my place sometimes. Let me remind myself exactly what that place is." She walked to the center of the chamber, standing directly under the imperial seal embedded in the ceiling. "I am Kira Vorthak, Empress of the Draconian Empire, co-ruler of 800 worlds, and wife to the being who has kept this realm stable for 2 millennia. My place is here, making decisions that affect the lives of trillions of sentient beings. And your place, Duke Malthius, is to follow those decisions or face the consequences of treason. Vorthak's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. Duke Malthius, you will apologize to my Empress immediately, or you will be removed from this council permanently. For a moment, it seemed like Malthius might refuse entirely. His supporters in the chamber urged him on with their expressions, while his opponents waited to see if he would complete his own political destruction. Finally, Pride warred with Survival, and Survival won. I apologize for my inappropriate language, Your Imperial Majesty, he said through gritted teeth. Accepted, Kira replied graciously. Now, shall we return to the business of governing? The alien cultural preservation proposal passed unanimously. Word of the confrontation spread throughout the Empire within hours. On human worlds, the news was received with a mixture of pride and amazement. Their former teacher had faced down a draconian duke and won. But in the noble houses of the core worlds, the reaction was more ominous. That night, Commander Thorne brought disturbing intelligence to the Imperial private quarters. We've intercepted communications between 7 noble houses, he reported grimly. They're calling it the Restoration Movement, and they're planning something significant. What kind of something? Vorthak asked. They believe they can force you to abdicate by proving that your marriage has made you unfit to rule. They're planning to present evidence to the Noble Assembly that the Empire is being weakened by human influence. Kira felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of evidence? Fabricated reports about military readiness, economic data taken out of context, testimonials from nobles claiming that other species no longer respect draconian authority. Individually, none of it would be convincing, but together, presented to nobles who already oppose the reforms, it could be enough to trigger a constitutional crisis, Vorthak finished. When the Noble Assembly meets in 3 weeks for the traditional autumn session, they plan to present their case then. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. While publicly maintaining their normal schedule of reforms and governance, privately Kira and Vorthak worked to build their own case. They reached out to military commanders, economic advisors, and representatives from dozens of worlds to gather support. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Zephyr, who had recovered from his injuries during the assassination attempt, came to them with information he had overheard while serving at various noble gatherings. They're planning more than just a political challenge, he warned. If the assembly vote fails, Duke Malthius has arranged for a military response. General Corval of the 7th Fleet has apparently agreed to restore order if called upon. This was far worse than political opposition. This was the beginning of a potential civil war. We need to move first, Vorthak decided. If we wait for them to present their case to the assembly, we'll be responding to their narrative instead of controlling our own. Kira had an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal. What if we call for a vote of confidence from all Imperial subjects, not just the nobles? A true democratic referendum on whether the Empire should continue with the reforms or return to the old ways. The proposal was unprecedented. Never in the Empire's history had common citizens been asked to vote on Imperial policy. But it would bypass the Noble Assembly entirely and demonstrate exactly how much support the reforms actually had among the general population. The nobles will call it invalid, Thorne warned. They'll say that only those with noble blood have the right to determine Imperial policy. Let them, Kira replied. We'll see how that argument plays when it's broadcast to every world in the Empire. The announcement of the referendum sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Conservative nobles immediately denounced it as a violation of ancient law, while progressives hailed it as the next logical step in imperial evolution. More importantly, it caught the Restoration movement completely off guard, forcing them to respond to Vorthak and Kira's initiative instead of pursuing their own. The campaign that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. For the first time in Imperial history, rulers and subjects engaged in direct debate about the future of their civilization. Town halls were held on hundreds of worlds, with local officials and citizens discussing the merits of reform versus tradition. On Earth, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Humans who had lived under draconian oppression for years suddenly had a voice in their own governance. But the response was positive on many non-human worlds as well, where species that had been conquered generations ago finally saw hope for cultural preservation and self-determination. The draconian core worlds were more divided. While many citizens appreciated the economic improvements and reduced military spending that came with peaceful governance, others genuinely believed that strength came through dominance and that the reforms made the empire appear weak to potential enemies. 3 days before the referendum vote, the Restoration movement made their final play. Duke Malthius released a recording that purported to show Kira meeting with human resistance leaders, planning the overthrow of draconian rule. The video was clearly fabricated, but it was well made enough to raise questions. Kira's response was to invite independent investigators to review all of her communications and meetings since becoming empress. The transparency was unprecedented and risky, but it demonstrated confidence in her own integrity. More importantly, technical analysis quickly revealed that the recording had been digitally manipulated. When the referendum results came in, they were decisive. 73% of imperial subjects voted to continue the reforms, with support strongest on conquered worlds, but also significant on traditional draconian planets. The margin was so overwhelming that even the most conservative nobles couldn't claim the vote was invalid. Duke Malthius and his co-conspirators were arrested the next day, charged with treason for their attempted coup. General Corval surrendered his fleet without resistance, claiming he had been misled about the nature of the plot. As Kira and Vorthak stood together on the palace balcony, watching the celebrations in the streets below, she reflected on how much had changed since that day in the slave market. She was no longer the frightened former teacher who had been purchased on a whim. She had become something she never could have imagined, a leader who had helped transform an empire. So, Vorthak asked, echoing her question from their wedding night, "Any regrets?" Kira smiled as she watched ships from dozens of worlds arriving for the celebration, each carrying representatives who now had a real voice in their own governance. "Just one," she said. "What's that?" "I regret that it took 3 years of conquest for us to find each other. Think of how much good we could have done with more time." Vorthak laughed, the sound carrying across the plaza and mixing with the cheers of their subjects. "My dear Empress," he said, "we have all the time in the galaxy now." In the months that followed, the Empire continued to evolve. The Educational Preservation Act passed, establishing schools that taught local cultures alongside imperial history. The Economic Cooperation Treaty created trade partnerships instead of tribute relationships. Most importantly, the Imperial Constitution was formally amended to include democratic representation for all species. Kira never forgot her origins as a slave, and she used that perspective to guide every decision she made as empress. She established programs to help former slaves integrate into free society, created economic opportunities for conquered worlds, and worked tirelessly to ensure that no one else would face the desperation she had known in that market on Zirian Prime. The galaxy was not perfect. No empire spanning hundreds of worlds ever could be. But it was better. It was a place where a human teacher could become an empress, where conquered peoples could preserve their cultures while contributing to a larger civilization, and where power served justice rather than just dominance. And in the private moments between public duties, when Kira and Vorthak sat together in their garden, watching the sunset over the imperial capital, they knew they had achieved something that neither had thought possible when they first met. They had created not just a marriage, but a partnership that had literally changed the course of galactic history. The slave markets were closed throughout the Empire within 2 years of their wedding. The last one, on Zirian Prime, where they had first met, was converted into a museum dedicated to the memory of all those who had suffered under the old system and a celebration of the new possibilities that had emerged from their pain. Sometimes the most unexpected unions create the most extraordinary changes, proving that love and hope can transform even the darkest corners of a universe.